Hello, I'm Dickie Arbiter in London, and welcome to Royal Report. Now, if you're wondering why I'm sitting here alone and my darling daughter isn't on the other end, very simply, there are things I want to talk about, and she'll get her turn to go solo in the fullness of time. She decided to leave me to it. Now, one of the big questions that I'm asked constantly, and I've just come off a cruise ship, lecturing on a cruise ship, is the monarchy in crisis? That's a word that newspaper people love to use. The monarchy is in crisis. Well, if you go back to 1936, they were writing that the monarchy is in crisis. Why? Because Edward VIII was abdicating. He decided that he couldn't do the job of kingship without the help and support of the woman he loved. And he was given an alternative, two choices. One was to ditch Wallace, or the other was to ditch the monarchy. He chose to ditch the monarchy. Was the monarchy in crisis? It wasn't in crisis. The only two people that were in crisis was Edward and Wallace, because the monarchy transitioned from Edward, popularly known as David, to his next brother. His next brother was 18 months younger than him. His next brother was the Duke of York, and he became George VI. What was quite interesting was that George VI had a daughter, but he had two daughters by 1936. But we talk about Elizabeth in particular, because when she was born in 1926, she was just Princess Elizabeth of York. That's it, nothing else. By the time her uncle David abdicated in December 1936 and her father became king, she became Princess Elizabeth, heir presumptive. I say presumptive because that means should the king and queen have had another child and the child was a boy, then that boy would have leapt to the front of the queue and become the next sovereign. It's all changed now. It changed at the time of about the Platinum Jubilee in 2012, the whole business of primogeniture, which means that the firstborn, whether it's a boy or a girl, is the next sovereign. So anyway, Elizabeth became heir presumptive, and George VI had a formidable task because he was very shy, he had a speech impediment, he had a very strong wife, and with her support, she became Queen Elizabeth. In 1952, she became Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. But during his reign, she was very strong. She was his strength and stay. It's a very popular usage in royal circles. She got him out of stammering. She got him out of his shyness. The war years came, and he was tremendous. He travelled to the battlefields, not to the front line, but to the battlefields to meet troops of the Commonwealth. In those days it was the Empire, and he really did work hard, and he was a very, very popular king. So the monarchy wasn't in crisis in 1936. The only two people in crisis were David and Wallace. They went off to France and married in May 1937, and quite frankly never lived happily ever after. He was boring and she was bored with him, but they had to save face and they stuck it together. Once again, the newspapers thought the monarchy was in crisis in 1952 when George VI died. They felt that Princess Elizabeth, who was 25 when she came to the throne, hadn't been prepared, was not ready, not mature enough probably to take over the throne. But they actually got that wrong because she'd been well mentored by her father. She was very au fait with the whole business of monarchy and what monarchy entails. And as we saw over her 70-year reign, she did a tremendous job. I'm going to jump ahead quite a few years now, in fact, quite a few decades, because 1992, which at the end of that year, the late Queen labelled as her annus horribilis, when anything that could go wrong did go wrong, the newspapers were again, the monarchy is in crisis. Yes, things were going wrong. The monarchy, I suppose, has dealt with things that have gone wrong since the beginning of time, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But no, the monarchy wasn't in crisis. The individuals perhaps were. I mean, who can forget August when the Daily Mirror or the Sunday Mirror, one of the two papers, was opened, and front page, centre pages, I think there were about 15 pages of Fergie. If you don't know who Fergie is, Sarah Ferguson, who was Prince Andrew's wife, was photographed topless, having her toes sucked by her financial advisor, who probably thought her toes were a new look abacus. But that's all at the end of Fergie. She was at Balmoral at the time, and the private secretary stopped her going into breakfast, told her what had happened, and said, "You better leave." And leave she did. And that ended in the end of that marriage and divorce in 1996. So monarchy wasn't in crisis. Individuals were in crisis. If I can go now to the Windsor Castle fire, monarchy in crisis. No, the monarchy wasn't in crisis. Yes, there was a fire at Windsor Castle. A government minister suggested that the government would pay for the restoration, which was totally out of his brief, because he had been briefed quite clearly not to say anything, not to hide anything, but not to say anything about costs and about the full work of the restoration, because nobody knew. The fire had just been dampened out. And nobody knew what the cost would be. It just so happened that the cost had been estimated in the region of 60 million. They actually came out at 36 million, of which 27 million, or 27% of it, was actually paid for out of tourism. So let's move on from that one. Diana and her Panorama interview, a crisis for the monarchy. No, it wasn't a crisis for the monarchy. It was a crisis for that marriage. The marriage was already in crisis, given that they were both having relationships outside of the marriage. In fact, Charles, who is currently King Charles III, admitted in an interview in 1994 that he had had an extramarital relationship because his marriage had irretrievably broken down with Diana. So I suppose that's okay. It depends which way you think, which way you want to jump. But you've got to remember too, in 1992, they did announce their separation. But that interview on Panorama really was a crisis for Diana. She had been inveigled into doing in the interview. We've subsequently learned that she was given a lot of false information by the interviewer. I'm not going to name him because we all know who he is. But she'd been given a lot of false information. She'd been told that various members of her husband's staff had been bribed. They hadn't been bribed, suggesting that they'd been paid lots of money to lay all sorts of accusations against her. And it was one of those things that, no, the monarchy wasn't in crisis. Diana was in crisis. And ultimately that marriage was in crisis because the Queen then instructed both Charles and Diana to seek divorce. And they did get divorced the following year. Rolling on a year later, the monarchy in crisis again at the time of Diana's death. No, it wasn't in crisis. It was an unfortunate accident. It happened to a very popular former member of the royal family, although she was still at certain times considered a member of the royal family, given that she was the mother of a future king. But the monarchy wasn't in crisis. The media had a field day in the middle of that week, leading up from the time that Diana died to the funeral at the end of that week, when the question was asked of the public outside, the mourners outside the precincts of the Buckingham Palace, should the Queen be in London? And the obvious answer is yes, of course she should be in London. Instead of asking the question, the Queen is at Balmoral, her grandsons are there, they've lost their mother, she's a grandmother, she is experienced, Prince Philip is a grandfather, he's experienced. Do you think they're doing the right thing by staying up there to comfort their grandsons? What would the answer have been? Of course they're right being up there. There was suggestion that when the Queen eventually came down to London, there would be a hostile crowd. Well, I was alongside her at the time. There wasn't a hostile crowd. She went to St. James's Palace. She received polite applause. She then went to Buckingham Palace. There was a pen there where she could go in, view the floral tributes, talk to mourners, again greeted by polite applause. And when she left it 40 minutes later, polite applause again. 2 hours later, she paid tribute to Diana. The media had been asking all week, where is the Queen's tribute? Now, one of the things that she never did was to bow to pressure. She did things, she had a gut feeling when the right time, and she felt the right time was on the eve of the funeral, by which time most people who were mourning in front of Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace, where Diana lived, had got the anger out of their system. And that night at 6 o'clock, and it was what we call in the business live television, nothing recorded, the Queen sat there with her back to open French windows. BBC didn't want the French windows open, but I insisted, I'd set it up, insisted that there was no separation on this occasion between the viewing public and those watching outside the precincts. And at the end of it, again, polite applause. There was even the odd cheer. She had done the right thing. And then, of course, as we all know, on the day of the funeral, as the gun carriage went past, the Queen bowed, as did other members of the family. This is Dickie Arbiter in London.
And I'm Victoria Arbiter in New York. Dad and I are thrilled to be back on YouTube.
So thank you all so very much to all of you who have subscribed. We really do appreciate your continued support.
If this is your first time here or you haven't done so already, please do subscribe now. By doing so, you'll help the channel continue to grow significantly, which will allow us to bring you even more fact-filled content on Royal Report.
Without your support, we just can't do it.
So we've set ourselves a target of 10,000 subscribers.
Look down at the bottom of the screen. How do you think we're doing?
Please click on the subscribe button now. There's no cost to you because subscribing is absolutely free.
And don't forget, you can also click on the little bell, which means that new episodes will be sent direct to your homepage.
Thank you so much. We are thrilled and grateful to welcome each and every one of you
to our Royal Report Club.
We'll see you next time on Royal Report.
Now let's jump ahead to where we are today. There's crisis again in terms of the media. No, there isn't a crisis. Yes, the King has a cancer, as does the Princess of Wales. His slimmed down monarchy wasn't probably what he envisaged when he first mentioned the idea of a slimmed down monarchy when he turned 70. But what has happened, we've lost Prince Philip in 2021. We've lost the Queen in 2022. Harry and Meghan decided to walk out of the royal family and go and set up whatever they're doing in California. And then we have older members of the family. Oh, I must not forget, we lost Prince Andrew too. He gave a very silly interview about his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein and got fired by his mother. But let's move down the food chain to older members of the family. Duke of Kent, 88. He's just retired as Colonel of the Scots Guards and handed over the colonelcy to his great nephew, the Duke of Edinburgh. There's the Duke of Gloucester. He's turning 80 very shortly. His wife, Bridget, is turning 78 very shortly. Princess Alexandra is 86. She's in a wheelchair. So there's a very aging monarchy, but it isn't in crisis. We still have, the King is doing his constitutional duty, which he's been doing since his cancer diagnosis first came about a couple of months ago. And that includes his red boxes, which are full of government papers that only he can see, full of papers on security matters that only he can see. He has to sign or initial. He does his audiences, his face-to-face meetings with ambassadors or high commissioners accredited to the Court of St. James. He does his face-to-face meetings with his Prime Minister. He did one sort of just before the budget in the UK with the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And he holds Privy Council meetings. More recently, he was at a side reception where he spoke to 4 members, veterans of the Korean War, celebrated, well, not quite celebrated, but marked the 70th anniversary last year. And he has been out and about at Windsor Castle. Easter Day, he went to the service at St. George's Chapel. He did a walkabout. People loved the idea. He's coming slowly to terms with getting rid of that frustration. He is, after all, he's head of state and he's doing those duties as constitutional monarch, but he's losing out on head of nation, which is going out and about in the UK, meeting people, meeting communities. He is a people person. I remember years ago when I worked for him as the Prince of Wales, people said, well, he's a good Prince of Wales. Would he make a good king? I said, well, you've answered your own question. He is a good Prince of Wales and he will be a good king, and he is a good king, and he's ably supported by Camilla, who's really his strength and stay, because things that he can't do, she is doing, and some. So the monarchy isn't in crisis. Will it survive? Well, if you go back 1,000 years, and the monarchy is almost 1,000 years old, we've had wars, we've had assassinations, we've had beheadings, you name it, we've had it. And the monarchy has survived. It will survive this, and it will survive the future. We have a head of state in waiting, William. One day he will come to the throne. Not too soon, I hope. And following him will be George, his son. So the monarchy is healthy. It might be reduced in numbers because at the moment, working, we only have Prince of Wales, that's William, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, that's Edward and Sophie, and the Princess Royal. People will say, well, not many are there, but they're doing the job, and they're doing the job incredibly well. So the monarchy will survive. I won't see Prince George coming to the throne. I probably will see Prince William, but I'm confident that here we are in 2024, the monarchy is going to stay with us because at the end of the day, there is no alternative. Thanks for joining me on Royal Report. Don't forget, press like, and don't forget to subscribe, because the more people that subscribe, the more people we have on our viewing platform. And if you do subscribe, also ring the bell, because ringing the bell alerts you to when a new post is up and running on Royal Report. So from me, until the next time, bye-bye.